You have to make people decisions. You cannot outsource people decisions. You can outsource tech decisions to your head of tech. You can outsource legal decisions to your head of legal. You cannot outsource people decisions. I keep going back that you can train people to make business decisions. But at the end of the day, the hardest decisions are decisions about people.
If you think about what's really happening in the RFP, when you go ask all of your cross-functional teams to give you their 200 questions, you bring it back, and then you make a decision, all of the suppliers in the RFP usually sort of come into this blob in the middle because one's better for IT and one's better for legal and one's better for engineering, and nobody gets what they really want. It's a compromise for everybody, and it's just this blah, mediocre thing in the middle. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Proc and Roll, your guide to practical procurement. Today, we are going into another episode of leadership. Today, it's leadership and decision-making. I've been listening to this amazing book from Ray Dalio about principles, and it really got me thinking about decision-making and how important it is to leadership. So I have been waiting to pick the brain of Natasha and Zach to try and get their insights on how they approach decision-making, what they have seen work the best, and really want to dive in here. If any of you have seen the book Extreme Leadership from the Jocko guy, the Navy SEAL guy, that principle is basically, as leaders, we are responsible, right? Everything that happens in our organization, in our team, like, we don't blame somebody else. Ultimately, the blame and the responsibility, the good, the bad, and the ugly sits on our shoulders. And that includes decision-making. Maybe decision-making is one of the very most important things that leaders do. Hiring people, setting strategy, making critical decisions. It's a lot of this comes back to decision-making. Now, we didn't really, in our first episode on leadership, we didn't get very deep into decision-making, but this feels like one of those cornerstone things that leaders have to deal with. So to kick this off, I'm really interested to understand what your default styles are for decision-making yourselves. I mean, I'll kick this off myself and just kind of say, I think my default is probably consensus. And all my study and work on this in the last couple of weeks has made me think that in some ways, consensus decision-making implemented poorly is really, really bad. And I've seen that in my own career as well. But it can also be really good. But I'm curious, Zach, let's start with you. When you look at decision-making, when you get into a meeting, what's your default in terms of moving towards getting a decision made?
I think you need to get the consensus. It depends on what decision is at stake and how big of a decision it is, and whether or not you have the authority to basically make the decision, whether you're responsible for the outcomes of that decision. I think the more you have responsibility for the outcome, the more you should have a say. And so you shouldn't delegate. You should be more decisive, let me put it that way, if you have the responsibility for the outcome of the decision. Where there are broader, more strategic type of decisions that need to be made, where you need to consult and involve more people, and other people also have a say and they must be heard, then I think you can focus on the consensus a bit more. I will say, though, I personally tend to find that being decisive is not a quality I see as much today as I'd like to. I think more leaders should be more decisive more often, right? And you should be able to put your neck on the line, take accountability and responsibility, and make that call. The reason is speed is name of the game nowadays, right? You got to be so fast in this day and age, in this moving market, in this, changing geopolitical landscape. You can't afford to sit down and just talk and discuss. And it's very hard sometimes to reach consensus, especially when people are all at different levels of capability and insight and awareness of certain things. So if it's in your remit, look to make a decision and look to make it quickly.
Well, I would argue that it's pretty hard to look at a situation in your organization where you're not responsible. I mean, if you're a stakeholder and you're in a meeting as a participant or an opinion or an influencer maybe, but I've thought about this a lot the last couple of weeks, and I'd love to debate this, guys. So don't let me mow over your perspective. But I think each of us are responsible. Like as the leaders in the organization, our lives, whatever, we're responsible for the decision, the outcome, the results of the decision. So that complicates a little bit of what you said, depending on if it's in your organization or not. Natasha, you've told us a lot about building teams, how much you like to build teams, work with the teams. I'm envisioning you sitting with your team in a room talking about some complex strategy or organizational plan. What's your default to getting to a decision? What does that look like, and how do you think about it?
I don't think I have a default per se, because it's situational, but I love hearing everyone's perspective. I love hearing what people think, because I am comfortable with making decision and being accountable for the decision I make. But I also know that I have so many biases in my head and so many natural propensities to gravitate to certain outcome that that I might be wrong. So, and there often I am. So hearing from my team helps me to crystallize and what I actually, how I need to think about the problem or the issue. I am not a shy bunch. So I agree with Zach, and it does annoy me to see how leaders are shying away from the decision, delays the timeline, pass the accountability, or just simply stretch timelines too much and just don't make decisions. Maybe because they're trying to get to consensus, but also, yes, what's the point of consensus? For everyone to agree? Everyone doesn't have to agree. Everyone doesn't have to be aligned. More often than not, people need to be informed about what's happening, especially if the decision you're about to make or a leader is about to make will impact them. But I love when everyone is on the same page, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that I always strive for everyone to say yes.
Yeah. Like informed decision making, if maybe informed by the consensus or informed by the group, but it sounds like, I love the answer situational. I don't know very many cases in life or in business when the answer can be purely yes or no, and it depends is probably the very true and best answer. But like informed.
I think what people appreciate is being in the know, and very often, when we were building Candor, Riley and I had a number of discussions, my founding partner, because we're from different generations and we brought different. He's the age of my daughter. I'm the age of his parents. And very often we did not see things eye to eye. Push comes to shove, I was making a decision. And more often than not, I was sided with my way of doing things. Because if at the end of the day, I am the one who carries the risk, then it's better to be the decision that at least I understand and agree with. And, but he always appreciated that he was always consulted with, informed, debated, discussed, and I never blindsided him, just turning in the opposite direction. I would always say, I hear you, I understand where you're coming from, but I think my way is I feel more confident with that. So I'll go with that.
I mean, ultimately there needs to be a decision maker that will make the decision and kind of enforce the decision and drive the decision. Have either of you been in a room or been with a leader that was exceptional at decision making, that kind of led the process, facilitated the conversation, arrived at just really orchestrated things in a way that wasn't manipulation, but was sort of the right blend of decisiveness, Zach, that you're talking about, but also, Natasha, you said a critical word that keeps coming up in my research, which is listening. Like, either of you have a great example of a person like that you've worked with?
Again, it's situational for me, Conrad. I've been in distress turnaround type situations, and I've seen some excellent operators whose entire job it is to move very quickly. And so they come in, they leverage all the experience, all their know-how, and they're very quickly, making decisions. They're asking for information. They're getting the information as quickly as possible, synthesizing it, and then making decisions or presenting decisions to a board or a committee or something like that for approval. But they waste no time, right? So you don't push anything to the board without a recommendation and a strong one that you're willing to stand behind. So again, I think it depends on the situation. I think one of my favorite frameworks for situational assessment of decisions is kind of Amazon or Jeff Bezos' concept of the one versus two-way decisions, which I think we've all heard of, right? But I think that's a great framework. You don't have to get every decision right. Yeah, like
Zach, describe it a little bit better for our listeners, any of them that haven't heard about the one-way, two-way door.
No, absolutely. So the way I understand it is basically if you're making a decision that you can't reverse out of later, that's is gonna lock you into something over a long time horizon. That is an example of a one-way door, a one-way kind of decision. And usually it applies to very few situations. It applies to those situations where you're making something that's high risk, highly strategic in nature. You're making a bet on the direction and you're going to put some money and investment behind it. The vast majority of decisions are actually two-way doors, right? And that, hey, if you get this one wrong in a month's time, in 2 months' time, in a year's time, you can just reverse out of it and go the other way. So again, it goes back to my earlier point as well around don't be shy in making decisions fast. Consider how important that decision is and whether it really truly is a one-way door, because those are few and far between.
So this opens up a great question, which is when I was at Intel and Adobe, there was a lot of conversation about decision making at an organizational level, right? If you push this to the limits, the CEO is responsible for every decision in the company, and that is an absolute joke. Even within just procurement, the idea that the CPO is going to make every decision, forget about it. Like, that's crazy too, especially in a large organization. How do you, how's the right way to think about what decisions to delegate and basically empower the team to make the decision? Well, you're still responsible. Like, let's be clear. You're the leader. If it hits the fan and there's problems, your neck is on the line. You're responsible. But when and why do you delegate the decision? And when do you hold the decision on your own desk and you make the call, like, formally?
How do you do it, Conrad? Like, you're the CEO of the company, you run the company for 9 years, you have large roster of clients, you have large roster of prospects, you have investors, you have employees. So you have a lot of people who you're responding to. So how do you decide what you delegate?
Well, it's complicated. So I would say what I'm dealing with, and maybe it's just my brain is saying it's complicated versus where I was before in a CPO position, but I was having a one-on-one last night with our CTO, and we're talking about incredibly technical stuff that he's dumbing down so I can even remotely understand what he's talking about. I'm still responsible for that decision, but I have to hire a really good person, and I have to trust that person is going to make the right recommendations. I'll poke around a little bit here and there, but how do I make that? So, Zach,
I wanted to get clarity on something. You said you're still ultimately responsible, but is there a difference here between responsible and accountable? Well, are you responsible for the decision, or are you accountable for the decision and the outcome? Because those are slightly different things in my head.
What
do you mean? What's the difference in the words there?
At the end of the day, as a CEO, he is accountable.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
He is one throat to choke if there are commercial or legal or personal consequences. But he's not responsible for every decision that he is making, but he is accountable for the outcome for the survival and the growth and everything that graphite represents.
Yeah, and you guys might be familiar with the RACI concept, RACI, which we use in consulting all the time, right? Responsible, accountable, informed, and consulted. And so for any particular activity, you map who is accountable, who's responsible, who needs to be informed, is there anyone who needs to be consulted on it? And usually the person who's responsible is the one who makes the decision. And sometimes it's the same person who's accountable. It can be the same person. It doesn't have to be different people. Sometimes it's different people, right? So you delegated basically the decision-making authority. In your case, Conrad, in your example, you're still accountable, but you're not the technical person here in that particular domain. And so you've hired someone and you've delegated that decision-making. But if it goes wrong, that's going to be on you. Right.
Yeah. I guess, Zach, I think I've been using the words responsible and accountable interchangeably outside of the pure definitions of a model like that. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is like Natasha said, I'm the one throat to choke. And by the way, I mean, when you're running a business, I'm the one the customer wants to talk to when, things go sideways. They want me on the phone because they know that ultimately I can rally resources and, I'm the person. That doesn't scale to, a mega $billion business where the CEO is on the call with all the customers. But I guess to Natasha's point.
No. Not true. Mark Benioff visited a lot of customers.
I'm just saying, it's just as a percentage, it's not going to be 100%. It's going to be, there's going to still be a requirement that, anyway, that piece doesn't matter too much to me. I think the accountability point, I don't think disappears. One of the things I love most about that extreme ownership book, and if any of you haven't read the book out there, you absolutely should read it. It's sort of mind shifting up to a place where there is no room for anyone to shift blame for something that's happening inside your stewardship. It's at any level, it's your stewardship. It's your, sorry, I'm using these words again. I was going to say responsibility, but it's your accountability. It's your neck on the line. So Natasha, how do I make the decision? I think it starts bringing up this idea of, I'm trying to remember what Ray Dalio calls it in his book. It's like the person who has the most qualifications, the most experience, the most wisdom and truth, or, the most capability to have an opinion. Like the three of us could vote on something that has to do with transportation in London, and there's really only one person in here that's qualified to vote on that. But the three of us vote, we decide that it's a majority opinion, and Natasha and I win because, that's distorted, right? So I think as I look across what I have to do on a daily basis, I try and stay back from imposing my authority to decide in cases where does this person have a unique set of, understanding and skills and experience. Gosh, I wish I could remember what Ray Dalio calls it, because there's a phrase that they use in his business to actually identify the person in the room. And they have this weighted scoring based on who has, I think it's believability or something like that, who has the most believability in the decision. But believability doesn't sound right. It might be something else. But yeah, but at the same time, I would counter that, Natasha, with kind of saying it lends back to this idea of, I love to build a strong team. I love to trust the team. I love to take 2 or 3 steps back so I don't get sucked into the debate, and I can watch the debate happen. And my hope is that the debate can lead to what feels like a really good outcome. And I'm seeing a lot of back and forth. I'm not just seeing sort of mushy acquiescence and compromise. Like we debate. Hopefully a decision comes to the surface. If not, and a decision is required, then I would step in and make a decision. And I think that does kind of carry into my world today, but not all decisions. Like if you get together as a staff meeting that's crossing all these functions, not all decisions should be decided like that. And let me bring back my extreme distaste for the RFP, right? If you think about what's really happening in the RFP, when you go ask all of your cross-functional teams to give you their 200 questions, right? And you bring all of this together, you do the weighted, all of the nonsense that goes into that, you bring it back, and then you make a decision. all of the suppliers in the RFP usually sort of come into this blob in the middle because one's better for IT and one's better for legal and one's better for engineering and one, so you just bring all of these things together. Nobody gets what they really want. It's a compromise for everybody, and it's just this blah mediocre thing in the middle. And ultimately then somebody's making sort of a gut decision, which may or may not be informed. It may just be a desperation to move forward. Now, don't throw them all out. Don't throw all RFPs out with that, that concept. But thinking about RFP as a decision, how do you structure it, and how do you structure these other things that we're doing in order to get to the right decision as quickly as possible?
Well, it just brings up an interesting thing for me, right? When you talk about, because you were specifically talking about the decision to potentially award a supplier the contract, right? So again, it's a decision that is based on a commitment that the organization is about to make. It's kind of more of a one-way door, right? Like, it's hard to reverse out of a supplier agreement once you sign the contract, and it's a multi-year agreement, etc. So I think it's absolutely right that you take the time in those moments, because those are the decisions that matter, where you spend the time to gather all the information, get all the insights, get as many views as possible, while never losing sight of who the ultimate decision maker needs to be. And for procurement, a lot of the time it is our customer, right? Ultimately, it's not really procurement. We don't generate the business requirements, which is ultimately what needs to be fulfilled here. So, for example, a decision like an RFP decision, the reason it takes so long, Conrad, is because there's a set of criteria that procurement need to decide and be happy with, i.e. the commercial framework, how many years, different clauses we're going to put in the contract, etc. The business requester has a set of things, which is around the actual solution or the product or service, and whether or not it meets their requirements. You have finance as well, who are going to make the decision around whether or not they're willing to commit the company's money. So it's almost like an RFP award decision is broken up into a whole bunch of smaller decisions. Each party is responsible for a different set of those decisions. And I think that's one of the reasons you get this tension. So I think to help you make a decision better in those kinds of environments, it really helps to do what we've been talking about, which is, break the different dimensions down. What decisions are you really responsible for here? Be clear about those. Yeah, you might have a strong view about something else, but if it's not really your responsibility and you're not really accountable for it, don't create friction unnecessarily, right? If it really does come down, if you prefer a supplier, but the business requester prefers a different supplier because of the service or whatever, that's their decision to make, right? Like, ultimately, they're the ones who are going to be who are in control of the requirements. So it just brought that into focus for me, Conrad. It's like, because we make, as humans, and I know you know this, thousands of decisions every day, right? From what to wear to which bus to catch to whatever, right? And so here we're talking about, decisions that matter.
Well, I'm going to defend my distaste for RFPs from what you said. You said that if you're signing a contract and making a commitment, it's a one-way door. I would say absolutely not universally true. There are supplier decisions that we make every day that are for sure two-way doors, particularly in the macro environment of the business. And there's decisions that are one-way doors because they're critical, they're really strategic, they impact product. So I really do think the segmentation around how what the real impact is here, don't just buy into Zach's strategy here that everything's a one-way door if it's a contract. And it's easy to do that. Like, I think it's easy to go there. And Zach, I'm sorry, I'm overstating probably how you're thinking about this, but thinking about the decision in a meaningful way, like what is the implication of this particular contract, of this relationship? And is it okay to take a risk and move quickly, or do we have to go through some big drawn out methodology? We could talk the rest of the hour on the decision making around RFP, and I would please save me from my soapbox. Let's set that aside for a minute and talk about, the crux of this decision making, which is you're walking into the room now. There's a debate, there's a dialogue, there's a discussion. What are the key steps that you go through with the group to set the stage and go through a process? Is there a way to make a process that gets you to the right decision versus have it be a bit like rolling the dice here?
I think if you think about formulaic approach, then it's like listen, evaluate, debate, discuss, align, decide, and then follow, right? But it's like, it's the formula that you may or may not apply. You were talking about the speed to make a decision. But I would also say that the quality of the decision is very important metric. And also, I have seen leaders who make amazingly smart business decisions fairly quick, and they do batshit crazy like just wrong decisions about when it comes to people. Because business logic and ability to weigh the facts with the numbers, think about consequences, that's very organic for business mind to take all of this into consideration and spit out the decision fairly fast. But the same leaders would put people against each other, would create atmosphere in a team by deciding how they communicate, or how they pair up the team, or how they divide responsibilities, or whose side they take. Those are the decisions that leaders also make. And I would say that they have much more impactful consequences than the decision who wins the RFP, frankly. Because whoever wins RFP today will be very different 3 years from now. And it's just the business, it's just the money. But when we are leading people and we make decisions that impact people, those decisions are way more consequential for each individual.
I think you're making a really important point, Natasha, because it's not just about making the decision, but it's about how you make the decision. And good decisions need to be made in a forum of transparency, right? And need to be communicated well, because the act of making a decision, I mean, sure, you can make that decision, but actually to realize the full outcome of the decision you've made, you need to make sure that it permeates, so all the consequences and the downstream impacts of that decision need to be controlled, need to be, seen through to the end. And so I think one way to do that is to make sure that as you're building to your decision, and when you finally make the decision, you're very clear in your communication with it, right? So that everybody in the room understands how you got there, why you got there. Like, that's super important, because that's how then the decision can play out operationally. And,
Yeah, but it's a snapshot. It's a snapshot and it's a crapshoot, because it's the right decision in the moment. You hope that this is the right decision on the long term. It may not be. Like immigrating to the States 30 years ago, I was crying my eyes out for 2 weeks. My then husband, literally had to almost drug me and then drag me out of Russia. But happened to be a perfect decision for me. My mom decided to stay. Not that perfect decision. So we're making decisions based on the information we have in a given moment. Based on, so that's why there are no good decisions or bad decisions. There are the decisions that we're making at this point of time based on the data we have and based on a whole host of psychological components that play in the making decision. It can be, I have a headache, I am hungry, I need to just get out of here, I am fatigued and I just need this discussion to be over. This is the hill I'm gonna die on, or this is not consequential, so I don't want to invest any time in it. So no good decisions or bad decisions. It's more where we are in the moment, and then what we're going to do with that next. And then we're going to be making the next decision. Seconds later.
I don't know if I can buy into this idea that there's no good decisions and bad decisions, because I've made bad decisions And I could go back and re-engineer it and say, yeah, but I didn't know what I know now. There's a lot of reasons why bad decisions are made, like in hindsight, right? It's always easier to look back at something and say, that was really stupid. I did that thing in a rush and I ended up losing $100,000 on this investment, or, this or that happened. We picked a crap supplier. There are bad decisions. Like there's no doubt about it.
No, but you didn't know in the moment that you're making bad decision. Otherwise, you wouldn't make a bad decision.
Sure, I don't think anyone, okay. So nobody wants to make a bad decision. No one's going into the room or the conversation going, hey, today we're going to just make a total shit decision here. Nobody's going to do that. I agree with you.
I think that there are some leaders who take a conscious choice and conscious stand that the well-being of their employees is not their priority. So they're making decisions without taking into consideration what is right for the team.
So I actually wanted to drill into this. Zach, I think we're going to have to put a pin for a minute in this alignment and implementation of decisions. I think that's really important. But if we go into what Natasha's talking about, I wasn't sure when you were talking about this bad decision for the team, Natasha, if you were describing a person's sort of weighted strategy deprioritizes team, or they just make bad decisions around people because they have no good intuition around people. Maybe they have really good business intuition, but they have really bad people intuition. But if they just made a deliberate decision and say, I don't care about people, I only care about money and results, like that's different than just, I don't have the intuition. Maybe
Conrad, I want to qualify that. You can make a hard decision that affects people in a negative way and still care about the people, right? Sometimes you're just in a tough
conscious choice. Yeah.
Well, sure. There's like 5 dimensions of what we're talking about here in terms of what could happen in a way that impacts people negatively, right? I could be just bad intuition. I could have a strategic, just like, I'm going to deprioritize the people. You could actually have an unrecognized, unintended, like a blind spot that has a negative impact that wasn't considered. There's all these kind of flavors of what could happen that impacts people or some other thing, negatively that, plays out in a way that in hindsight, you could look at it and say that was...
But Conrad, you're literally setting up the framework for how to make good decisions. We can flow this through those 5 things, those multi-dimensions. That's exactly how you need to think about a good decision. For example, when making a decision, ask yourself, do you have any blind spots? Is there something you haven't thought about yet, right? That will help feed your decision-making and make you better. Another dimension that we've mentioned, consider the impact on consider the empathy side of it, like the impact on people and how it's going to affect people. Have you thought about that? Yes. Okay, great. Tick. So you've weighed that into the decision. I think you can almost run through a set of what these things are. And I think that's how you ultimately get to a good decision, right? It's making sure you tick the boxes.
Yeah, I mean, you could create a program for this, right? The program is almost like the weighted decision model that we put on an RFP. I mean, you could say, we could just go in advance of any decision and say, here's the 20 things or the 10 things or the 5 things that we should consider anytime we make a decision, right? How important are these things, or how are we going to weight the importance as we get into that? I mean, you could definitely come up with a programmatic way to do that. And maybe that becomes very helpful. But that would help you avoid rushing past a blind spot without consideration of a dimension of the outcome that, you might be ignoring. Sorry, Natasha, what were you going to say?
I wanted to say that this is when and where intentions really matter, because I don't want to dumb down this conversation to RFP decisions, because those are simple. Those are like easy calculation, right? And frankly, we assemble 50 stakeholder RFP committee. I don't know partially for what. Like, on one hand, we want to make sure that we ask everyone opinion and nobody feels left behind. On another hand, it's a shifted responsibility that's like, well, it's not me, it's marketing. It's not marketing, and it's HR. It's not HR, it's finance who decided to select the supplier. I am So I actually, again, I want to elevate our conversation more from RFPs, the evaluation, to the decisions that we make in business and decisions that we make as leaders.
I agree with you. I mean, the RFPs lend themselves to structure, and there's like a process laid out, and like totally agree with you. I mean, Zach, you mentioned something about a blind spot, so I'm gonna kind of go back to this book I've been listening to, the principles from Ray Dalio. He talks about a few cornerstones to decision making. I'm just going to run through these really quickly, and then let's dive into them wherever it like drives your interest. The two biggest barriers to making a good decision are, for the leader, is ego, like I'm smarter than everybody else, or I'm just, I'm diving in. And the second one is blind spots, like I don't realize what I don't realize. The second cornerstone that he talks about is meritocracy, like the idea meritocracy, not democracy. If it's a pure democracy, it's back to, me and Natasha outvoting Zach on some London transportation question, right? And not just, that means we can't just get, like we talked about before, to some consensus mush. Like the goal isn't, everyone agreeing that, or getting the boss to decide. The goal is that the best idea, the best decision should win. And then the third piece here is, and it was believability. So he calls it believability weighted decision making. So in the case of London transportation or some strategy, Zach is the most believable. Like, we can talk about consensus and we can vote, but frankly, Zach's believability weighting is sort of 99 votes out of, Natasha and I each get a half a vote or something like that. So those are the cornerstones the other piece that he mentions is a couple more here that I really loved. One is reflecting on the decisions and the things that are happening as well. And this might not have been in the Dalio book, but the ability, he talks a lot, because he's building these principles and these patterns of documenting what you learn from decisions you're making and carrying them back kind of as a learning cycle back in, which I think feeds the believability weighting of the organization and the individual. So, I think, he's built an entire financial services and money business around making good financial decisions based on kind of the learning and the process and this, idea meritocracy instead of the highest paid person's opinion always wins kind of strategy. I think there's
sometimes highest paid person has more experience and data points that would lead to better decision. I think it's a very, like, if we really want to create a formula of a decision, then we can start throwing components in it. Like, I think that it's knowledge, it's ego, it's intuition. And intuition is an interesting one, because very often you can't logically explain. You just feel it. And I think I want to go a little bit like sexist, that women are better at that generally than men, because many times I found myself in a situation that I know that everything points in this direction, but this is just the wrong direction.
Well, Natasha, is it that women are better at the intuition, or is it just men let their egos drive more, right? Because that I can believe, right?
It's not that women are egoless. But I would say that there are multiple components of how we make decisions, and I think this is one of the critical areas of leadership. Like, how do you determine when do you let people make a mistake? Like, which areas you find a safe ground for them to practice making a decision, and then it's like, okay, do you agree that that was the wrong choice? Like, interestingly enough, we had very similar conversation the other day. We're looking for a provider who need to help our client with something. And one of my teammates recommended a provider who technically in a couple of years will be our competitor. It's just right now we are small and not as we're just not as big as they are. But in a couple of years, if we continue, as we continue growing, they will become our competitors. And I said, I'm not sure that, like, this is like really you bringing someone living in your house and just like you're sharing our client information. I'm not sure this is a great idea. And his position was that, well, they have a solution and we need to deliver solution to client. Let's do it. So we had 30-minute conversation. During that 30-minute conversation, became very, very clear that they are not, that this would be very, it's just not a wise choice for candidates.
It came clear to both of you or just to you? Did your clarity come up or both of you together came up to be more clear?
I asked him at the end of the conversation, do you agree that that was not the right idea? He said, yeah, most likely. So which decisions did I make? So I made a decision knowing in advance that that's not a good idea to invest my 30 minutes because that's my support to my business partner. I also made a smart decision asking him, do not ask them to sign NDA because if they don't sign NDA, we're not going to disclose any information. If they sign NDA, then we kind of like would feel a little bit, or they would be surprised why we're not sharing information if we ask to have a conversation. So it's kind of like this, or maybe another decision would be like, we really have no time and there's under no circumstances they will ever become our subcontractor. So let's just save 30 minutes and say thank you, no thank you, and walk away. That's a possible decision too. Considering where we are and that we had a number of, and the personal dynamic we have, where we are in business, I felt that investing 30 minutes, that would be the right choice, and not signing NDA, that was a smart choice. So, good job.
Natasha, I want to poke on your intuition here. And I heard something this morning that I'd never thought about before from a gut and an intuition perspective. And this person outlined in this, as she was talking, she outlined that the gut is actually a very rapid, complex review of all the patterns that you've seen that you can't really like describe, but your brain goes through all of this analysis in any given moment. And you have a feeling, you have a gut, you have an intuition that this is a good idea or that's a bad idea. So, I've never actually had somebody describe to me that. Think about what I'm saying and how close this aligns to what we think about as AI today, right? AI is looking across a whole bunch of patterns, very quickly coming back and having some perspective or some opinion, and you're looking back across your experience and your wisdom, like your years, your all the stuff you've been through, and you're having a feeling. Like I can't really give you a detailed 45-page outline like AI does, but I have a feeling that that's a bad idea. Those are not always right or wrong. Like sometimes they're wrong, sometimes they're right. But what do you think about that intuition and that gut actually being rapid decision making from your memories and your experience versus just some supernatural, woo-woo thing that's happening?
Yeah. I'll give you a very short answer because I don't have to think about it. I know it for sure because I have, for years, I've been having problems with my digestion. I'm not sharing too much information, but I just studied this area a lot. And literally, our gut has more neurons than our brain. And all experiences, they are recorded in the gut. The brain is the artifacts. It's just a collection of memories, information, pieces, and all of that. all emotions, all kind of like life experiences, they actually reside in your gut. So the coordination between your gut area and your brain is kind of like it's a direct line. So that's why intuition is not it's actually very factual. It's just sometimes hard to describe because you cannot assign numbers to it, or you may not remember which experiences led you to this reaction, but you make a decision based on how in the moment it makes you feel.
I'm so glad I asked you and you answered that, because you're reinforcing this idea that your gut is actually a complex algorithm and analysis of experience that's going on. Yes? Am I overstating that?
No, I'm asking Zach his perspective on that.
No, I've also, Natasha, from various documentaries and things that I've watched, like I'm amazed at how much work the gut actually does, and I think science is only beginning to tap into what that is, right? But it has such a huge impact. I guess for me, my final question is more around, how do you know if you're making a gut-based intuitive decision? Because sometimes I feel, I'll sit with a decision and it'll stick with me and it'll sit with me over many days, and I'll be pondering like, yes, this sounds and feels like the right thing to do. But how do I know that's my gut or my brain that's just convinced itself day after day that this is the right thing? Is there a way to tell what a gut-based decision is? Or I don't know.
Do you guys ever feel like when you think of something or someone, or you're trying to make a decision, do you ever feel that if this is unpleasant, that your stomach shrinks? Like, do you feel the knot?
If it's really a detestable thing, I feel it like that. Yeah.
Because
not always, but like sometimes it's a lot more subtle than that. But sometimes if it's really a strong gut reaction, yeah, it feels physical.
I sometimes feel just like sometimes it can be very, very pronounced, and sometimes it's just slight. So that's why I also think that maybe this is where physiology of men and women send us different signals. But so I'll use myself as an example. Leaving corporate world at 55 and being well recognized in my industry as a progressive transformational CPO, I received a lot of opportunities to become a global CPO somewhere else. It made complete sense for me to do it and take the jobs because I would be compensated handsomely. I would represent great brands. I would be bringing my skills, knowledge, and expertise, and I would work for another 5 years. And by the age of 60, would be just like very kind of carefree about any financial or established reputation or all of that. But every time when I would have a conversation with a recruiter, a hiring manager, or I would just receive an email in my inbox about potential opportunity, something inside of me just shrank. It's just like I had the feeling of like, And so I went just the hardest route, which we already discussed, way less predictable, way less commercially lucrative, way more challenging and disappointing at times, many times. But somehow, based on the path that I, as a professional and as a human being, supposed to walk in this life, that should be the path. This should be the steps that I was designed to take in this life. It was partially conscious decision because I had to weigh all pros, cons, how I gonna operate. I don't have the second income to fall on. So like, what are the challenges that I'll be facing? Who I'll be facing them with? What if I do? Like a lot of factors went into consideration. But at the end of the day, the easier decision, more predictable decision was not taken. I couldn't explain why. I just felt that it's wrong.
I think Zach's asking a really critical question, which is, Zach, I'm going to word it a little bit differently and get a little bit proactive on, you're walking into a meeting, like what situations are you going to say we're ready for launch of the next, giant rocket into space on an intuition or a gut, or is it going to be science and data-based decision making? When does the intuition, when do you trust and like lean on intuition, and how do you balance that under what situations in your decision making?
They've got to be aligned, right? Like you wouldn't want to send if all the data and the dashboards are saying green, but your gut feels off, then you probably shouldn't launch the rocket, right? But if your intuition is saying everything's fine, but the dashboard's flashing red, I don't think intuition kicks in at that moment.
Well, Natasha's describing a case where the math kind of says go take the other job, and her intuition says don't go take the other job.
Like, guys, this is what the saying "bite the bullet" is about, right? So it's kind of like you're never 100% sure. Like people marry for love, and people are absolutely like infatuated in love, committed to people who they propose and they marry, and we have divorce rate 55% globally, right? So what happened is like nobody wants to make the wrong decision, but it's kind of, you never know for sure. So you build a rocket, everything aligns fine, or something is missing. Well, okay, build the rocket is like really extreme circumstance, but even surgeons, sometimes, like how many times doctors in a very critical moment make decision that the boards will be analyzing after, and they would say that like you made the wrong call or you made the right call. And sometimes they make the right calls in spite of the facts that suggest take a different direction. And sometimes they make the wrong calls when all facts align nicely. Right? So I think we having these instances when you have to kind of like bite the bullet, make a decision based on the data you have.
Yes, exactly. I think that's exactly two sides of it. It's based on the data you have. Because I just try to imagine a counterexample of someone who just made decisions based on their gut. Those would probably be a series of really bad decisions. Like someone who doesn't look at facts, doesn't look at data, doesn't spend the time mulling things over in their brain. I feel like the gut part needs to come on top of the analytical part, right? You can't just go off your gut and live your life in that way. Maybe you can. Maybe it's a great life. I don't know. But I don't imagine the decisions will be optimal if you just walked into meetings and just went off your gut without getting all the information first, doing that analytical part first, and actually weighing things in your mind first.
Well, I want to bring this back to the believability score, right? And Natasha brought up an example where you can have a leader that's really good at business and strategy and really bad at people decisions. Maybe their intuition and their gut is better trained. They've had more quality experience that is feeding their gut, right? And their process from a business perspective, but they've never really had good reinforcement learning into their gut on the people side. So their believability, they shouldn't be making people decisions. Like, let's be clear. They have a pattern of like lack credibility and capability to make decisions that are impacting the people side.
But what do you mean they should not be making people decisions? Making people decisions is part of their job.
Okay, but back to what I talked about with my job. I'm not the CTO. I'm not the technical genius. It's part of my job, but I'm going to find somebody that can make a really good technical and architectural decision instead of me imposing something I don't have good believability rating on to decide on technical architecture. And if you're, again, I don't think to be a leader, you have to be all held inside the same skin. Like, each one of us to be a great leader has to have all of this stuff. Right? You have to make people decisions.
Like you cannot outsource people decisions. You can outsource tech decisions to your head of tech. You can outsource legal decision to your head of legal. You cannot outsource people decisions. I keep going back that you can train people to make business decisions. You train them how to think logically. You train them which factors need to be taken into consideration. They see you doing it 10, 15, 20 times. And if you're good, that they will learn from you. But at the end of the day, the hardest decisions are decisions about people.
Okay. So Natasha, this is an area where, like, once again, we're going to disagree with each other. So I'm going to outsource the hiring decision to a bunch of people in my organization. You go figure out who you want to hire. I'll probably participate in that interview for different reasons than, technical qualification, maybe cultural fit. Maybe I put a stamp of approval on the top of it. I'm going to sign the offer letter, but I am going to delegate a bunch of people decisions. There's other people decisions that I probably have to take full ownership for and make a call. But what the main message I'm trying to make is if you don't have good intuition and you're a leader and you're struggling to make good people decisions, I don't think you have to go punch your ticket and leave the leadership room. I think you should find somebody that has good people intuition and partner very closely with them. A chief of staff, somebody in HR, like if this is a weakness for you, it doesn't mean that you have to be a horrible leader, but you need to know what your blind spots are and you need to fill them in. That's, I don't know.
If you're aware of it. I'll give you, so hiring decisions are, recruiting decisions, I don't consider them people decisions. Hiring decisions, yes, people decisions. Now, let me give you real instance. I had an employee who said the wrong things. He was not my direct report. Just person was
said the wrong things, like offensive or stupid or what?
I consider it stupid. HR consider it offensive. The person who was recipient of those words consider it a fireable offense. And I've been defending and explaining that the intention was pure, it was wrong choice of words. The person is from has very different upbringing, different generation, different culture, worked in the environment where such vocabulary is not offensive. And there was no bad intention. The person apologized 3 times. So I first defended the person in front of HR, then in front of ER, then in front of HR, ER, and legal. Then corporate safety and security joined the team. Then, at some point, I was on a call with 7 VPs. 7. And 7 VPs told me that, Natasha, this case, like the reason we're providing this recommendation is because in situation like this, we always recommend that the person leaves the company. It's a fireable offense. The person needs to be let go. I was fighting for very in a very committed way for that employee. And then at some point, I realized that I am fighting for one person and the powers above me, really, really strong. And I'm going to end up losing a lot of my political capital and a lot of my credibility. And if I lose that, it will negatively impact the rest of my team. And I have other 200 people that I am here to protect and care and be responsible for. So defending one person was a conscious choice. A week later, the conscious choice was to let it go for the benefit of everyone else who I was supposed to protect and defend and care for. So you cannot outsource that. Even though that was not my direct report.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's things that you can't outsource. And I think that's true even beyond people decisions. You can't, there's other things that you that you're being irresponsible if you give the decision to somebody else. Like I don't know. Maybe you think it's only people decisions, but I agree with what you're saying. There are cases where you have to be in the room and you have to make the call, and there's no escape.
I just think that business decisions are easier to train to.
Yeah, and I guess I would argue that probably is a factor of repetition and experience, right? Because the HR people, they see cases like over and over and over and over again, and we sit down and talk to them, and they say, "Hey, we've seen this multiple times. It's going to go down this pattern." Like I've been in those situations where they almost predict exactly what the person's going to do next. Hey, next step is they're going to take a medical leave of absence, and boom, the next day you get an email and the person's like, "Oh, I'm having this thing and I got to be gone." Right? So like they have different pattern frequency, and so they have different pattern recognition, and their instinct and their ability to decide is better. So I don't know, maybe it's easier to teach because for the most part, people aren't doing as many stupid things that draw us into spending 80% of our time on people decisions versus business decisions. I don't know. That's a premise.
Yeah, I always put the empathy lens on it whenever it deals with people. I think it's because you can't teach empathy. You can't train empathy. You need to experience empathy, and you need to like jolt yourself. Like, you need to understand what it feels like. It's an emotional thing, right? Whereas a business decision about, weighing this versus that can be made very analytical, and, you can intellectualize it ad nauseum. But when it comes to people, it's about feelings, and it's hard to train feelings, right? Feelings have to be experienced. It's my 2 cents. Yeah.
I suggest we wrap up with throwing in, like if we're building the formula for decision making, what components go into formula? So we talk about intuition. We talked about logic.
You mentioned knowledge and listening.
Knowledge, listening.
One-way doors, two-way doors.
One-way doors, two-way doors.
Blind spots. Conrad's, am I the expert? Am I the, what did you call it, Conrad? Dalio called it something better.
A believability score.
Believability score. Yeah. Believability.
I want to throw one more thing in here before we wrap this portion, because there is another model that's called, I'm an 80-20 person, right? And this model is from Colin Powell. He has a bunch of stuff on leadership, and he says, if you make a decision before you have 40% of the knowledge to make the decision, you're making it too early. If you make a decision after you have 70% of the knowledge and the data to make the decision, you're making the decision too late. I actually hadn't seen that model before this last week or so as I was diving into this. I thought that was very insightful. And so it kind of comes back to your question, Zach. I just want to share that model with folks that, when you walk into a situation, when do you just throw down your intuition versus when are you listening, learning, and collecting data? Like, when do you let that intuition start to measure things, and when does it feel like it's too late?
It's a good thing that you didn't send the rockets to the space with 70%.
Yeah. It is really interesting how different decisions demand a different level of data science and precision, right? When lives are on the line. Like, there are so many things that I want to talk about from a decision-making perspective. Most of the rest that's on my mind actually talks about, and it really leans into this idea of AI and the impact on how we're making decisions today. Automation, AI isn't the first kind of automation impacting decisions. There's plenty of stories of airline pilots that have an automated autopilot signal or data bleeping in the kind of cockpit that confuses them making a really good decision in that moment. So this isn't like automation impacting decision as this thing just for today, but the advent of AI is absolutely complicating decision making and having an opinions and having intuition. So I want to get back together and talk about decision making, leadership, and AI, and kind of how they come together, and how, what's an intelligent way to think about this emerging super intelligence that's sitting alongside of all of us. The other thing, Natasha, I know you've got to run and jump into work, and so do the rest of us. But I do think maybe what we do is we go through this next conversation and dive deep into automation, AI, and decision making, and then we come together. Like, let's start working on a framework as to how what's the model that each of us would bring into the table to actually make a good decision and improve the probability of it being a great decision. Which is a blend of all of these things we've talked about. Intuition and gut is huge. Does that sound like a good plan?
It's a great plan.
All right. Next up on the podcast then is leadership, decision-making, and AI, the blend of so many of our favorite topics here. This has been awesome. I'm gonna start thinking more about what I'm eating. In all your research, Natasha, does the food you put into your gut change your intuition?
No.
No?
Nope.
Okay, so I can have that ice cream after all and still be a good decision maker.
Yeah, it just messes up with your stomach lining, but no. It's different things that those neurons that fire, they have different nature.
Today I once again thank my lucky stars that I know both of you. You bring so many good insights to. As you can tell, I'm super passionate about this because decision making is how many decisions do you make every single day, and how much does the quality of your decision making impact your life? You know, Zach, I married my wife on gut intuition. There was no science, there was no data, and this year we celebrated 37 years together. I'm hoping we have another 37 together, but there's like decisions are so. By the way, if my kids tried that, I would be like, that is the dumbest way to make a decision. Like, but this decision-making thing is just so intertwined to everything that we do, and it's so impactful. A bad decision at the wrong time of your life can send your life into tailspin. A really great decision can absolutely do just the opposite. I hope everyone's enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. You guys are the best. I love you both. Everybody, make better decisions. And we'll see you on the next episode to bring AI together into that process. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Bye.